He was just a little boy when his parents walked out of his life. No goodbye, no explanations, just gone. He waited, 1 day, 2 days, then weeks. But they never came back. And the world, it didn't wait for him. It moved on. But fate never forgets. Because years later, and they'd walk into his office, desperate, begging a stranger for help, not knowing he was their son. Daniel was only 6 when everything he knew vanished in a moment. His parents left him at a crowded train station with a bag of clothes and a confused look in his eyes. They promised to come back, but they never did. For hours, he waited on that cold bench, thinking maybe they were testing him. But as the sun disappeared behind the tracks and the noise faded, he realized no one was coming back. That night, he became an orphan, not by death, but by choice. He was taken in by the system, but it never truly gave him a place to belong. Every home felt temporary, like he was a guest in someone else's life. He moved from one foster house to another, never staying long enough to hang a picture or unpack completely. Some adults ignored him, others just wanted the paycheck. And Daniel learned fast that he couldn't rely on anyone but himself. School was no better. Kids were cruel. He wore secondhand clothes and brought a plastic bag for lunch. They laughed at his silence, mocked the fact that no one came to pick him up after school. He stopped raising his hand, stopped trying to make friends. He wasn't just invisible, he was unwanted. But he swallowed it all, burying his hurt beneath a mask of indifference. It was easier to pretend he didn't care than to admit how badly he wished someone would stay. He started working young, sweeping barbershops, carrying groceries, anything to earn a few coins. There were nights he went to bed hungry and days when he didn't speak to a single person. But in that loneliness, something unusual happened. He began to observe, to notice patterns, to listen to the way people talked about money, choices, consequences, and without even realizing it, he was teaching himself how the world really worked. Daniel never forgot the silence that followed his abandonment. But instead of letting it swallow him, he made it his training ground. While the other kids his age talked about parties and clothes, Daniel watched YouTube videos on how businesses worked. He borrowed a cracked tablet from the community center and started taking free online classes, pausing constantly to take notes in a dog-eared notebook. At night, when the world was asleep, he'd stare at the ceiling and whisper to himself, "You're going to make it." His days were long and thankless. He worked at gas stations, washed cars in parking lots, delivered food in the rain with an old bike he'd fixed himself. Every customer, every dollar became a lesson. He noticed how certain stores were better organized, how some clients tipped more when service was faster. That's how he learned efficiency, through sweat, through trial and error. He wasn't just working to survive, he was watching, analyzing, building something inside that no one else could see. At 18, his life changed when a local NGO invited him into a program for youth with entrepreneurial ideas. It wasn't fancy, a small office, old computers, a shared fridge. But for Daniel, it was heaven. He pitched an idea for a tech-based logistics tool that would make small businesses run smoother. His pitch was raw, but his conviction was undeniable. They saw something in him that no one had ever seen before, a future. They gave him a $500 grant. He turned it into a company. The next 7 years were a blur of hustle, learning, and failure turned into fuel. He made mistakes, lost clients, rebuilt again and again. But by 25, Daniel was running a multi-million-dollar logistics startup that served national brands. He wore suits now, shook hands with investors, gave talks at conferences. But deep down, he was still that abandoned boy, just with a bigger voice. And while some people build empires to show off, Daniel built his to make sure he could never be ignored again. It was a rainy Tuesday when they walked into his building. Two strangers, poorly dressed, holding hands as they nervously approached the receptionist. Daniel was reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant knocked gently and said, "There's a couple downstairs asking for funding for a medical cause. Says it's urgent." He almost brushed it off until she added a name that hit him like a ghost ripping through time. He stood frozen, the air in his chest suddenly too heavy to breathe. Through the tinted glass of his office, he watched them from the elevator cameras. Older now, tired. The man's shoulders hunched under the weight of illness. The woman clinging to a file of documents. They didn't recognize him. Of course they didn't. They hadn't seen him since he was a boy with cracked shoes and questions in his eyes. But Daniel, he remembered everything. The sound of their car driving away, the cold metal bench, the promise they never kept. He didn't storm out. He didn't reveal himself. Instead, he had them brought to the conference room, watched from the hallway. They pleaded for support from his foundation. He was their last hope. The man had cancer. Treatment was expensive. Their community was small and donations weren't coming. They'd heard that Daniel's company helped families in crisis. Irony never screamed so loud. The people who once abandoned him, now begging him for mercy. As they left the building, unaware of who they'd just spoken to, Daniel leaned against the wall of his office. Hands shaking, eyes burning. Years of healing threatened to crack under the weight of a single moment. He could have walked away. He could have turned his back the way they once did. But deep inside, another voice rose. One quieter, stronger, forged from the pain they left behind. It whispered, "This is your choice now, and you are not like them." That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat alone in his apartment, the city lights flickering through the glass as memories he'd buried clawed their way back. He saw himself as a child again, crying quietly in unfamiliar beds, waiting for parents who never returned. The anger began to rise like a storm building beneath still waters. Why should I help them, he thought. Why should they get grace after giving me nothing? Every success he had built now trembled under that single ancient wound. The next morning he met with an old friend, someone who had been with him before the fame, before the money. They sat in silence until Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, raw. "They asked for help," he said, "and they don't know who I am." His friend looked at him, eyes steady. "Helping them won't fix the past," he said. "But maybe it could fix something in you. You don't owe them anything, but maybe you owe it to yourself not to carry this forever." Daniel stared at the ceiling that night, no longer haunted but uncertain. He knew he didn't want revenge. That was too easy. He wanted release. Closure, not for them, but for the boy who waited at that train station and never got an ending. And so he made a decision, not out of guilt, but out of power. He called his foundation, gave the approval, and ensured every cent of that treatment was covered. But he never put his name on the donation. He never told anyone, not even them. Weeks later, he received a letter at the foundation, a simple thank you from a couple who still didn't know who saved them. Daniel read it once, folded it, and placed it in his desk drawer. Then he returned to work, silently, steadily. Because some victories don't need to be seen, some justice doesn't need applause, and sometimes the deepest healing comes not from confrontation, but from becoming everything you once needed for someone else. Weeks passed. The couple never discovered who paid for the treatment, but the man recovered, slowly regaining his health. Daniel received updates through the foundation, nothing personal, just numbers and notes. Still, every time he saw those reports, a quiet sense of peace would settle in his chest. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was closure. He had rewritten the ending of a story that once defined him. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer felt like he was running from something. He returned to his office not to prove himself, but to build something greater than success. He began speaking to young people in foster care, mentoring those with dreams but no direction. Not because he needed to, but because he knew exactly what it felt like to be forgotten. And more than anything, he wanted to be the voice someone never had. The media never picked up the story. No headlines, no viral videos, just a quiet act of redemption from a man who never asked to be broken but chose to heal anyway. And that's the kind of greatness the world often misses. The silent ones, the unseen choices, the acts of compassion made when no one's watching. Daniel didn't want applause. He wanted peace, and he had finally earned it. Because true strength isn't just rising when you've been knocked down. It's choosing not to pass the pain forward. It's healing the wound without needing to reopen someone else's. And Daniel, he became more than a survivor. He became the proof that the past can shape you, but it never has to define you. And if this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened to Grace. She was just a hard-working woman, loyal, patient, and kind. But life pulled the rug from under her feet. Her husband walked away without warning. She lost her job soon after. Alone, afraid, and unsure of her worth, she hit rock bottom. But instead of giving up, she took one step, then another, toward the dream she'd buried for years. Grace transformed heartbreak into fire. She built her own business from scratch, stunned everyone who doubted her, and created a legacy that changed her life and the lives of others. Her story is raw, powerful, and unforgettable. Click on From Forgotten to Unstoppable and see how a woman once overlooked became unstoppable.